Now, one of the favourite verses is Galatians 6:6. I'd like, as I read this verse to you, I'd like you to note that this verse is not specific. It doesn't mention the word tithe. It doesn't mention the word pastor. It has a universal application. So here we are, Galatians 6:6. Let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. Now, this is applied by some people who take a very strong division in the Christian walk. They see a division. You have the clergy class on the one hand, the religious professionals who need to be supported financially. They need houses and cars and pensions and dental and medical insurance. And then you have the people who just sit in the pew and they're supposed to listen and be obedient and be humble, and they're the laity. This view strikes me as unbiblical. I don't believe there is a clergy-laity division. If we go to Revelation chapter 2 verse 6, it mentions the deeds of the Nicolaitans. All right? Now, Nico means to conquer, and Laos means the people. So it seems that at the church of Ephesus, they were commended by God because they had a dislike for those sort of religions that established a clergy class over the laity. Going back to Galatians 6:6, let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. The verse doesn't say you are to pay 10%. There's no command in this verse for people to pay 10% of their money to the church. It just is not there at all. It also doesn't say that you're to pay a pastor. It says in general terms, let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. So anyone who teaches in the church is entitled to share in the good things with the one who is taught. See, according to this verse, anyone who teaches, anyone, not just one person who calls himself a pastor, anyone who teaches is entitled to share in all good things. How did this work in the early church of the first century? Well, Acts 2:44, which I will read, says that they had all things in common. Now, all who believed were together and had all things in common. This meant that Christians shared what they had. 2 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 1. Now concerning the ministering to the saints, notice the plural, the ministering to the saints, plural. It is superfluous for me to write to you. So there is a ministry to the saints in the plural. What happened in the early church? Firstly, there was no such thing as a pastor. Pastor is not a office. It's a gift. If you look at Ephesians 4:8, it talks about God giving gifts to men, and one of these gifts was pastor and teacher. The early church was run by elders. We read of Paul going from town to town and appointing elders in the plural. So there was no such thing as one pastor over a church. You had a plurality of elders. So if anyone today is entitled to a free house and a free car and a pension and medical insurance and dental insurance, it should go to all of the elders in that church, not just one person. And the way that this worked out in the first century was that most people who ministered, most people who taught the word, did so unpaid, rather like the brethren do today. However, when money and food was raised, it went to those people in the church who were poor, but the people right at the front of the queue who got the very best of the food and the most generous of all the help were the people who taught the Bible well. So in other words, if you had, say, some widows and orphans, and you had somebody who worked as a musician or an usher and they were poor, and then you had somebody who was an elder but he couldn't support himself financially because he was a poor guy, then you would find that the person at the front of the queue who would receive the best food and the best help would be the person who taught the Bible, the elder. Musician, usher would be in the middle, and the widows and orphans, they would of course get food, but they wouldn't get the best food. Thank you for listening to me.